this is recorded, but also this is a very, very sort of beginner sort of intro to design systems. We won't be building a full and complete design system, but we'll kind of illustrate some of the ideas behind getting into Figma and making a design system. The other thing is we're going to start with slides, but I kind of hate all slide presentations. I remember when I was younger, like some of the greatest presentations I learned from was just watching somebody build something on the screen. So we're going to do that as well. So I think that would be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Awesome. All right. And of course, Akeem, you can interrupt me at any point if you see questions coming in or whatever. We have a group today. So, yep. All right. So anyways, this is a intro to design systems. I'm a designer advocate at Figma. I've been at Figma for about a year. Now, I have been working in Figma for a little over 3 years, working at Dribbble. Before I was one of the lead product designers there for a few years. And then I was actually a freelance designer for quite a long time. And I worked all completely in Figma there as well. So little background, been a product designer and web designer, having my own studio and working for other small startups probably for more than 10 years. So been around for a little while. It's really good to be able to speak to you. This is my first time being able to speak to a Friends of Figma community. I helped set up the Friends of Figma communities, but I'm super stoked that I get to speak to you all today.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to have you here.
Yeah, and thanks to Hakeem for reaching out and being very persistent and saying, let's do this, let's do this. So I'm super stoked on that. A little bit about me, designer, I'm an artist, front-end developer, and a designer advocate at Figma. I've sort of, as I've gone into the industry, fell in love with a lot of things, product design, also illustration. I've been able to do some really cool product design and illustration for some cool companies in my career. It's been great. Let me give you the link to this presentation so you can follow along here. If you want, you can just go, as soon as you see this link, you can follow along with me as we build things. All you'll have to do is just drop down this drop-down menu and duplicate it into your drafts, and boom, off you go. So a little bit about me. This may be a little scary for some. I try to choose some tame photos, but I'm absolutely in love with horror movies. If I've got any horror stands in the house or people that love horror, put your hand up.
Actually, yeah, I love horror movies also.
Yes.
I watch horror movies.
Okay, Hakeem, what's your favorite? Give me one.
I love you love watching horror movies. Please let them know in the comment section. Okay, hi Remy.
Oh, right. Okay. I love that, Remy. My first story watching Saw with some family members is my brother's wife was there with us, and she ran out of the theater sobbing. So maybe it wasn't very great experience for them. Awesome. Good. Yeah, it follows. Yes, even that. Okay, yes, I love horror movies. I've been on a mission to watch them all. I have not completed that mission at all. The other thing is I love digital art. I've actually been an artist in Illustrator for quite some time, but recently started using Procreate. So here you'll see some art that I do in Illustrator. I've done a little bit of art in Figma as well. So just really into digital art. Here's a few of my pieces and things that I've done. I've actually had the honor of being able to work for Disney and actually make art for them as well, which has been so fun and such a big dream.
That's really great.
I'm stoked on it. I hope to do more in the future. And lastly, a little bit more about me is I love hot sauce. Here's some of my favorites right here. I'm constantly looking for new suggestions. Yes, I love it. Raji, you cannot watch them all. It is true. You are right about that. Here's some of the hot sauces. I'm guessing I can't taste all the hot sauces either. If you have any amazing Nigerian hot sauces, please let me know because I don't know any. All right. Moving along, like I said, my most recent job before becoming a designer advocate was the lead designer at Dribbble. And I was in charge of the design system, and I can show you a little bit of that, but I was in charge of the design system behind the new Dribbble.com, this new sort of like white Columnar. We really wanted to kind of boil down those styles and really make that style guide for Dribble much simpler and less competing colors, and wanted to get to the core essence of the brand. So we built the design system for Dribble. We'll give you a little peek behind the scenes on that one. Myself and Ryan over at Dribble ended up pulling off this design rebrand. So anyways, a little bit about that. Now let's jump into what we're supposed to be talking about today. What is a design system? At its core, a design system is really simple. I think one thing that I want to encourage, Hakeem told me that a lot of you are newer designers or maybe students, and what I want to encourage you to do is to not get too intimidated by what a design system is. Really, design systems are all around us in what we see that man has made. It's just a set of rules to keep everything consistent, to keep them all looking and feeling like they belong together, that they're family. Here's a good idea of more of like a visual design system. We see these 3 books here, and I think we can all see some commonality here. We can see that we've got a italic font down here. Sure, it changes sizes, but it's always in the bottom right. We've got the logo always in the bottom left. And we seem to have a system here. Let's have black and white illustrations of animals on top of this serif typeface and this color. So you can kind of begin to see a system here kind of playing out. The other thing is we can see systems here with the national parks here in the US. These are some of their location manuals. And you can see here, right here it says National Park Service, but we can see that these all look pretty similar, right? Big black bar on the top, that bar is the same height. It's got a certain kind of font chosen, and it looks like some of the guides here have said, oh, we can actually have like people's heads coming over on top of that black stuff, or maybe the Statue of Liberty here. So we can see design systems here. We can see a design system of a form here. We can see that looks like it's always the same height here on the header, a book apart, a book apart. Maybe we can occasionally bring in things like this subtitle. Looks like the number of the book is here. You know, I'm sure y'all are super smart and you have eyes just like me, and we can see that there's kind of a system going on here. And these are intentional. These didn't just happen. These are intentional. Somebody chose each one of these and said there are rules here. So for instance, we can see that this responsible responsive design is much smaller than maybe the sustainable one. And that seems to say that there were rules for flexibility built in. Yeah, these fonts can range between these sizes. It's okay to be a little bit smaller here, so long as we have only 2 lines maybe. Who knows what the rules were, but somebody was making those rules. And of course, our childhood favorite, Legos. Somebody had a system for these. I remember as a kid, I used to call out to my brother. We had this big thing of Legos on the ground. And I'd be like, I need a 2x4, thin block, red, blah, blah, blah. We had a naming convention for everything. And it was super cool because it enabled us to be able to communicate faster and say, I need this, I need that. Can we build this? And you can see here, there must have been a master behind the design on this, because apparently if we stack up 2 or 3 of these thin blocks, they'll actually equate to exactly the height of one of these thicker blocks. And you can even see down here that they had different names for them. A 1x1 brick here, a 1x2 brick, and then of course a 1x3 brick. So we've got names, we've got color allowances. So Lego has their own design system too, just a set of rules so that all of these little parts can work together really well. These rules help keep our team and our products consistent. Imagine if you had some brand new designer at Lego showed up and they made some brick that never fit with anything. How useful would that be? Probably not very useful. So these rules help to keep our team and our products consistent. So we have to ask ourselves, like, what sort of rules should we make? Well, there's a lot of rules we can make, and we're not going to be able to cover all of them here. This is only a 1-hour session, but what we can do is start to think about these things and look into them. Well, maybe we could talk about typography and say, like, how do the typefaces work together? How do the sizes work together? And when do you use what size? We can see here that Mozilla has their own type scale. So this is kind of the introduction of that term, type scale. Now we know, like, oh, Okay, we can have an extra large, large, medium, maybe a regular size font for most body copy. So anyways, we can talk about typography. What other things can we talk about? Well, we can talk about colors, especially when we're talking about digital design. We can talk about like, what's our brand colors look like? At this point, we're still sort of talking about almost like a style guide, but we're going to keep on moving. And a design system really is a style guide paired with components, paired with rules, paired with communication between your teams, between your developer, right? Like, you don't just design things to exist. You design to exist in a visual form. You design them so that we can build something with them. So we can see here, Lyft has, I love Lyft brand because it's so simple. There's just this primary palette. It's like white, pink, black, boom. We're off to the races. Now, here we've got some other IBM. This is an IBM blue. There's lots of shades of blue, but we can start to think about colors. The other thing that we can think about is grids. Like, how do these grids work? Grids help us line up things. Think about those Lego bricks and how we have those little round knobs on the top. Those things help us actually click the pieces into place so they'll all work. In this way, grids will work for us with digital design because they're going to help us line stuff up on the screen. Like maybe the header should go all the way across, and maybe if you've got a little card or an image, how wide should that be? And where should that line up? It keeps everything nice and neat. So in this case, we have more of a flexible grid. In this case, we have a fixed grid. And in this case, we just have a pixel grid. And sometimes that pixel grid is incredibly useful. We'll do one of those today. Shotola said, can we say style guides is a subset of a design system? I would absolutely say so. I think a long time ago when we were just dealing with print design, sure, design was a little bit simpler back then, and we might have just had style guides. Or if we're talking about a brand, maybe we just have style guides. But for digital designers that are working on products, we're bringing all of these things in together. So I think that's a really good estimation there, is that style guides are a subset of design systems.
Okay, cool.
The other thing, what about icons? What about little pictures that communicate things more than one word? In this case, we can quickly recognize that this might be an email or this might be settings. These little pictures have a great way of helping us to figure out what something is immediately. But how do we actually design an icon, and how do we design a consistent icon? I think I could design one icon, but can I design a lot of them and have them all feel like they work together? Do we have a grid for those too? On the right here, we see an icon grid, and we'll talk about this, and we'll make a few icons today on this grid. Let me do this. So we can talk about icons. We can talk about so much more. We can talk about controls. What are those? Well, they're like buttons. They're menus, checkboxes, sliders, things that you can input text into, things that you can click. And when you click them or tap them, something happens, something changes. So, and those controls can be what we make them to be. In this case, we see controls like a primary button. That's a button that says, I want you to click me first. You're the number one thing I want to be clicked on the screen. Whereas a secondary button might be something that's like, this is maybe a secondary action. We want you to do this here, but maybe not this, or maybe secondarily this. So there's lots of different ways that we can define these controls, and we can see here a few examples of those. But I want us to think about this, and Shotola brought this up earlier, is that it's more than a UI kit. Design systems are working, living, breathing, changing things. We're constantly adding to them, and we use them to help communicate. A system is also a system of communication. So if we look here at this Nissan Stadium, and maybe the outcome of that design is something like this. Now, when designing this, I don't know exactly how this exactly got pulled off. I don't know exactly how the designer set this up, but we see that there's sort of like spaces, and there's a certain relationship of like each chair when you build it, how far away it should be and what the distances are. And somehow we get to here. So I want us to think about design systems and UI kits a little bit like these pictures. Just because I showed somebody these pictures doesn't mean that I would get this immediately. There's a lot of communication that happens in between. And there's so much more. I wanted to give you a quick example really quick of just kind of like a working documented design system. And this is going to be in something called Carbon Design System. I showed a few examples of this earlier. How's everyone doing? I just want to check that I'm not moving too fast. I want to see if everyone's doing well, if I'm able to articulate clearly.
Hope everyone is following, please. If you have any question, please drop it in the comment section. And if you are following, please type hi in the comment section. Thank you.
Cool. All right.
Okay, cool.
When I was younger as a designer, this is kind of how I learned. I just looked at the way that other people did things and then dug in deeper. So this carbon design system here, we can see that there's all sorts of things that they began to thought about as they've needed more and more things. How do we pick a date? They've designed a date picker. Here's what this date picker looks like. Here's how it works, etc. We've got all sorts of things. And I would encourage you to just work through this, work through any design system that you can get your hands on. We can see here, like, here's a form, and here's how these forms line up. Everything has been thought about in these forms. Here's what these drop downs look like. When they're selected, this is what they look like when they're selected. This is what a loader looks like, just like this. This is what a modal dialog looks like. So when I click this, you can see that dialog comes up. They've got these two big buttons here. And so they've thought about these styles. So design systems are so much more than what we're talking about. Now, today, we're only going to talk about a few things, and we're going to work those together. Then we're going to publish a little mini design system. We have about 45 minutes to do it, so I think we should jump right in. But keep in mind that a design system is all of these things. It's the documentation. It's the websites that actually tell us about how they work. When we click this button, how did it fade in? How did it move in? How did the background darken? What level of opacity is on that background when it darkens? Lots of things go into it, but I don't want you to be intimidated by making all this. This is a ton of stuff. So we're just going to jump in a simple way. Yes, like I said earlier, I get really bored with slides because it's so like heady, and it's not, I like getting in. I'm a builder. So all this talk is getting a little boring. So let's start building. All right. Now, I've intentionally left a lot of sort of blank pages here, and we're just going to start moving through. What we're going to do is we're going to build a mini design system, and we're just going to build one from scratch. Now, that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes you're going to come into a team and you're going to need to build a design system based off of some other designs that were pre-existing. So you're going to need to take inventory. You're going to need to go research, oh, what do all the current dialogues look like? Buttons, what do they look like? Okay, let me rebuild them in Figma. In our case, we're lucky because we're just going to keep it simple and we're going to start from scratch. So here's our first example. Now, grids. Grids, remember we talked about those. They help us line things up. So grids are pretty simple. We can just create a frame here. And in Figma, we can just add a layout grid like this. Boom. Now, we can also change these grids. So here, hey, everyone. I can see y'all in here in the file, just checking things out. You can follow along here if you'd like as well. And since you have view-only access, what you can do is you can actually copy things. As I build them, you can copy them and put them in a new draft like this. So let's say we were building this grid, we wanted to keep this, you can copy it and just slam it right in a new draft, and boom, you can check it out and see how it's working. Okay, so in this case, we're going to do an 8-pixel grid. I love 8-pixel grids because they're perfectly divisible. 8 divided by 2 is 4, 4 divided by 2 is 2, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and so it's perfectly divisible. You never get half pixels. If I divide 5 and a half, I get 2.5 pixels. It gets weird. So we're just going to say this, and we're going to create our very first design system style. So I want to save this grid because I just created it. I'm going to come in here into my grid styles. I'm going to hit plus, and I'll just put an 8-pixel grid.
Hi, Roger.
Yeah.
Can you please paste the Figma link in the comment section?
No problem.
For us to join.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we probably had some people coming a little bit later. No problem. All right, there you go.
Cool.
And just a reminder for those coming in right now, very introductory level. You're not going to learn how to create the hottest, best, and most amazing components. We're doing simple stuff here, just talking about introductions. So now what we've done is we've created this grid style. And what that enables us to do is, say we're working on a smaller component here, I can actually just choose this grid style here and it's saved for me. That's what a style does in Figma, is that it saves it. Now I just called it pixel grid. If I ever wanted to, I could come back in here and I could edit this thing like this. And I could say, maybe I want it to be something else. We can stack up multiple grids if we want to as well. All right, so we've created our pixel grid. And what that'll do for us, as long as we turn on snap to pixel grid, now as we start drawing things on the screens, buttons or whatever it is that we want to create, we can just say snap to the pixel grid, look at that. And if we turn off, actually if we say layout grids and turn off snap to pixel grid, that's what I meant to say, is that we'll actually snap like this. And now it'll perfectly align. This way everything is going to be perfectly lined up for us and spaced out for us. This is great. Let's create a few other grids. Now this here is an example of a columnar grid. A columnar grid is pretty easy. All we have to do is just hit plus here, change that grid here, and change out the style to a column grid. Now a column grid will help us create multiple columns of data here. Let's say that we've got some photos here, and we want to put them all in a grid, like maybe it's Instagram or a photo sharing app. This will help us line up photos like this and always keep them perfectly spaced apart. This is why a columnar grid is very helpful. If you imagine trying to do the same thing on an 8-pixel grid, look at how hard it gets. Like, it's hard to know whether or not I'm the right distance apart, and it's very difficult to work with in that way. So this will be our column grid. There's no necessary sense to this. There's lots of popular grids to build on, but in this case, we can see here that it's just a fixed width grid. Each grid item is 128 pixels and it stays centered. So we're going to create this as a style as well. And I'm just going to call it my column grid. And then lastly, we'll talk about one last kind of grid. Now, the web, as we move on and we get more and more devices, we've got iPads and we've got iPhones and Androids and all sorts of Kindles and things in between. We're not working with one set of fixed width devices, and often this means we need to start working in the modern digital age with a flexible grid. And this is what a flex grid might look like. In order to create a flex grid, what we can do is just hit plus, go to columnar grid here, and we can actually define the number of columns that we'd like to have. So let's say we have 8, but we want them to stretch. Our gutter is going to be the space in between. We'll work with 16, and maybe our margin is going to be the distance from the outside. We can now see that this flexible grid here works more like this. So we'll save this one as well. We'll call this our flex grid, and we can work with all of them. We may not work with all of them today, but we've already started to create some grid styles. That's our first part of a design system. If we ever wanted to publish this out to our team now, we could. If we see here in Figma and we want somebody to be able to use those grids, if I hit publish styles and components, you'll see here that we have a lot of different things here. These must be some old components here. Really all we've done are these 3 grids here. And if we want to publish them, we can. Now I'm going to publish them really quickly. And in this other document here, I'm just going to go to assets, and I'm going to bring in that intro to design systems. We can see here, there it is. And I could bring in that library and now start working with those grids. For now, we're just going to keep on moving. Looks like we've got about 35 minutes, and I want to get into building some colors. Now, we talked about grids. Let's talk about colors. There's lots of ways to start colors for your design system. If you're working from scratch, who knows, you could reference an image, and maybe that's sort of your inspiration. A lot of people could use mood boards for things like this. So let's just say I had an image here, and this is sort of representing the mood of my entire app. I could take this image and then just sample colors from this. So I'm just going to create a couple of little squares here and just sample some of these colors that I like in this image. Maybe I want like a really fun, like techno looking, sort of like underground concert looking thing. And maybe these are my colors for my design system. And then maybe we'll choose white as well, because we want a little bit of a neutral. All right, these are the basis for our design system now. And we need to define what's our primary brand colors. There's all kinds of thought that goes into this. Typically, you would work with your brand team on this too, because you want to know, like, what are these colors representing? This is our primary brand color. We want it to be loud and fun. This will be our dark color, etc. Now, we're not going to go into that, but let's just say that this is our color system. So what I'm going to do is set up a little guide here for these things. Now, when we're first starting your design system, you don't have to have these components. You can literally just create, and this is how I did it when I first learned Figma. We can literally just create this, and I'm just going to create these little swatches, and this is going to be my colors. So I'm going to put to the right here, I'm going to put, this is our primary brand color. And then this one here, this will be our secondary brand color. This kind of supports, what happened there? This will be our secondary brand color. And then this black here, this will just be like sort of our dark brand color and our light brand color. So we'll have dark here, and I'm just going to ditch all of these here, just because I feel like it's going to make things complicated for us today. I'm going to move these down. You can look at those later if you'd like to. And then lastly, we're going to have our white, and this will just be our light color or background color or something. And we make the rules. Remember, we're in charge here. We're working with our team, and we're defining what these things are. Now, this is great. We might need to have some subtle colors in between. I can think maybe we would want to have something for our text fields, something to have some soft grays. So we can always do that. Let's just make a few soft grays here. I'm just going to take this same color here. I'm actually going to use Shift, and I'm just going to press up on this, and I'm just going to soften that gray to something really nice and subtle. Now, remember, design systems are always changing. So we can change this later. We don't need to have everything set in stone just yet. So I'm going to put here, this is going to be sort of our light color, or like our accent color here for accenting off the white. Now, this is super simple. All we have to do is create these to be color styles. So same way that we did those grids, I'm going to hit plus, and I'm going to put, let's call our brand Techno. I'm not sure why we're going to do that, but here we are. Primary brand. Okay. So by putting slash in here, I'm going to group them. I'm going to be able to group this primary brand color here. And we're just going to fast forward because this is kind of boring work. So I'm just going to keep putting in, this is our Techno brand, and this is going to be our secondary. And this one's going to be our dark. We'll just call it dark. And a lot of times it helps to give these colors names that have meaning, or at least in the description, give something that has meaning. Dark doesn't have a whole lot of meaning, but if I'm to go in here and edit this style, so let's go here. Let's see if we can edit this style here. Wondering what's happening here. There we go. Now what we can do is we put a description in here. So give this name some meaning. This could be used for backdrops, or modals, or secondary buttons, or something like this. We can give meaning to this. Now, we don't know what that meaning is yet because we're just building this system. But remember, we can always go back in and edit those descriptions. Now, we're going to hit this background here. We're just going to put in here. This will be our white. So it's going to be our Techno white. And we are nearly done with creating our color styles. And then lastly, we have our Techno accent. Now, we just did a random sampling of an image. These colors may not work that well in actual practical use cases. There is a plugin on the Figma community, and it's called Color Palettes. And I invite you to go ahead and use it, check it out. You can install it just by going here into the community and typing in Color Palette here. We'll be able to bring that up and install it. So we can actually just go through lots of different palettes here and see if there's anything that works for us. If we're actually starting out on a brand new brand, we could see things that feel like very harmonizing here, if we'd like, as a little bit of an assist. But we can see now, we can check this out. We can see that we have grid styles and color styles. If we ever wanted to do that, we could publish those out again, and we're building our design system library. We can see that we've changed these colors here and added them to our library. By clicking on the canvas, we can see that we're building a little library. Next, let's talk about typography. Now, if we just had the same size font for everything, how would we know what's a heading to a section, or what's a new section, or what's like the most important bit of information? Typography and type scales is how we can pull this off. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do this, but it is a little bit more heady. I think that sometimes it's easy to just start off a little type system by saying, all right, let's do this. This would be my heading. And maybe that's a 16 pixel font. Here, I type in 1.6. And then what if this was my body here? Well, maybe that's a regular font weight. And so we're starting to define like, oh, cool, this is what the most important information is here, the heading, and then this information here is my body. Now, there's a lot of different great plugins that can help us out with this, but one that I like is actually in this link here, if you need to install it. It's called Type Scales. Yes, I do think that typography is a very challenging part of design systems. Currently, I've never been a really strong person within typography, more within visual design and polish. But type scales really helps us get to harmonizing type scales. The idea here is that how can we take all sorts of font sizes and use those font sizes, and they really work well together. And type scales uses, and typography has used this for quite a while. We can see here that we have some really interesting names like major, minor, minor, major. This might remind us of music, and that's because it does. All of these different scales are often a relationship of how music scales would work together. And they sort of borrowed that, lifted it, and put it into type scales. The other thing that we see here is the golden ratio. And if you've ever seen that, this is this idea of a harmonizing formula and ratio that we see in nature. And because we see it in nature, we feel like, hey, it should work well here too. So these are basically different formulas for like magic numbers in a way that we can relate typography. But let's not get too heady about that. Let's just say I want my base size to be 16. That's a pretty average size for a base font size that's legible and readable for most people on digital devices. And then we can say we want a simple one, so we're only going to go with a few scales here. We can see here that the font sizes that are being spit out. Now, I only want to go one scale down, and maybe I'll go 3 scales up. And you can see what's happening. The blue one here is actually the main font size, the base font size. This would be maybe a larger header and a larger header and a larger header. And of course, this would be like a smaller text size here. You might want to use that for helper text on a form field, etc. Now with this one, we can just hit generate and boom, off to the races we are. So we've got all of these different sizes here. Now I'm going to just trash this one here. This was one that I worked on for my last stream, but we'll go ahead and just make a mini one for this case. You can always reference that one there. So we've created all of these different font sizes. So we're going to take this 16 pixel one here. We'll go ahead and use Roboto. Roboto seems like a pretty commonly used font. Now, we could talk about fonts and what those brand fonts should be and what those fonts mean and what they make us feel, all those things later. But for now, we're working on product design. This is going to be Roboto. It's good enough. It'll work for us. So for here, we're just going to create out those text styles. So let's get going. I'm going to create this one. This is going to be my body text style. So this will be my, and we'll just say this is going to be for a desktop web project. So I'm just going to say this is for desktop, and I'm going to put this is my desktop body. So I'm going to group it under a desktop app, and then we're just going to say this is the body. Daniel Abreu asks, when it comes to responsive design in mobile, do we need to change the font size of the design system? Like in the desktop, the body type size isn't the same in mobile. The answer is, as always with design, maybe. So sometimes we will change it. Sometimes you can define one if you feel like 16 pixels is working out and that type relationship is working out for people on mobile devices, they can be shared. So you could just have a flexible grid, but not a flexible type scale, but you can also do the same for mobile. If you feel like those values need tweaking, we can create out a mobile style for body. Maybe that's a little bit bigger, or maybe it's a little smaller. And yes, you'd have to have a typography scale for mobile designs. In this case, we're just talking about desktop, but absolutely. Okay, so we've created this one. This is our body. We can see it's assigned here. And we can see now what we're creating here, text styles. We could see desktop body. Okay, on this one here, we're going to go ahead and make this a little smaller. We can always fudge the rules here. I don't like these odd numbers, so I'm going to go down just a little bit to 12 or maybe up to 14. This is for very tiny text, not going to be very readable. Occasionally we'll use this very tiny text. So I'm going to go ahead and put in here, desktop/small. On this one, this would be our different levels of headings. So maybe on this would be the level 1 header. This would be the biggest header we could possibly get on a page. So I'm going to bump this up just because I love my 8s. I'm going to bump it up to 32. And for my header, I want it to be a little bolder. So I'm going to put it to bold, and I'm going to say desktop header 1. You can also put H1, whatever you'd like to put here. Whatever names you want, you don't have to stick with anything. But in my case, I'm going to put heading level 1. This is my most important heading. And then here, we're going to check out this style. This would be my heading 2. I'm going to move this down to 24. Remember, I like my 8s. So I'm just doing a little bit of fudging here. And I'm going to put in here desktop H2, heading 2. And I'm already getting very bored of type scaling. So on this last one here, this will be a header level 3. And so I'll just add it here. Now there will be all kinds of different type styles that you can do. If you look at any of those resources I put in the closing slide here, you'll see that there are all kinds that we can do. Just to give you a little preview of what those might be able to be, and the last time that I did this, we did header 1, header 2, header 3, something known as a subtitle, body, a bold body, a small pre-title. That would be text that comes above maybe a header, and then of course button text and link text. So the list goes on. These things can get much more complex, but let's move on to icons. Now with icons, let me see if I can find my icons that I put in here. Boom, there they are. Bring them on over. Okay, all right. This is a pretty common icon grid here, and I advise you all to go ahead and borrow this and use this. But the idea here is that when we create icons, we need to be able to create them in such a way that they all feel like they have visual balance. One doesn't feel huge and bold, and the other doesn't feel like very, very, very small. Mati is asking a little bit more, do you use percentage or pixels for leading? For example, 24 pixels leading versus 150%. Leading refers to, and if we go back here, we can actually see, like in the case of the body. So let's go back to this body type here. Now, when we start typing and this text wraps, this is the leading. It's the space in between the lines here. And sometimes, if we go in here and we actually edit this, we see here it's on auto, this line height here. If we make it less, we can see it gets so cramped that we can hardly, it's just a little too cramped, and it doesn't breathe well. And I can't track the lines as easily and wrap to the next line of reading. So in this case, let me just repeat this here a bunch. What we're going to want to do is to find something that's a little bit better and breathes more for that body type. So in this case, I'm going to come here, and I happen to know this from being a web designer in the industry, but I really like about 130%. So to answer you, I always do mine in percentages. But those percentages, I also want to end up in not half pixels. So if we look at this and we take 16 times 130%, so I'm going to do 1.30, that ends up in a 20.8 pixel. So it's not a full and it's not a complete, like it's not a whole number there. And so oftentimes that's not a good thing. I want those things to be perfect. And what people will often do here is they'll actually calculate them in the percentages here and then maybe put in 22 pixels here. And that way it's an even number to space out these lines here. So it's up to you. I can also find the perfect number as well if I'd like to. And so maybe it's this, maybe I need the exact one. So I want to say, okay, I actually want it to be 22 and I'm going to divide that by 16. So I need 137.5. I can actually find that exact percentage, and now I'll have perfect pixels in between those spaces of my line height there. So moving on to icons, because we've got about 20 minutes. Janice, we're just doing, we just decided on one of our type scale grids here. So if I go here to the type scale, sorry about that, I misspoke. Here, if we go to type scales, we used one of these here, and I believe we used major third. So, all right, let's move on to icons. In icons, we're gonna have a 24 pixel grid, and it's a pretty common grid for us to work on. And what we can do with the 24 pixel grid is just start drawing that icon. Now I'm gonna take this template and we're gonna build our very first icon. And I'm gonna wrap this template with a component just by adding a component around it like this. And we're gonna call this search. Now, icon design has its completely own different fascinating culture, but what we're gonna do here is just draw out kind of like a monoline, simple, easy icon here. Now I can always turn on my grids here as well. So I'm gonna add my layout grid. Remember we had that 8 pixel grid. We can add the 8 pixel grid here. I'm gonna turn off the visibility of my template here, and I'm gonna turn on a background color of white here. Whoops, I'm in the wrong space. Where am I? That's where I meant to be. Whoops. All right, turning on my background here, and I'm going to turn on my pixel grid here. So you can see now that these are the 8 pixel lines here. I can also just have the pixel grid. As soon as I zoom in, that pixel grid will show up. Notice there's no pixels here, but as I zoom in, there it is. Now, what I want to do with my icon here is that I want to draw this thing right on the perfect spots and right on pixel perfection. So let's see, did I call this search? Yes, I did. Great. All right, so now I'm actually going to just start drawing this shape. Now remember, I can always come back here and turn on snap to pixel grid. That's going to really aid me in lining these things up. Now I'm going to flip my fill and my stroke by hitting Shift X, and now I've got a line here. I'm going to put these right on the center. If I put this right on the center, those lines might actually occur on 0.5 pixels, so it might get a little bit of blurry, unless of course I go to 2, then we'll see that it's actually perfectly on the pixels there. So we're gonna do a 2 pixel wide stroke there, and then I'm just gonna create a line here. I'm actually just gonna draw it manually because I know exactly where I want it to be, and I'm gonna put a 2 pixel thing here. Now we've created this search icon. Okay, great, we're icon design masters now, right? So we've created our first icon. In this way, we can actually take these 2 icons, we can actually union them together if we'd like to create that icon. Now the spacing is a little off, right? Look, we've got 1 pixel spacing here, we've got 2 here. This is gonna result in a lopsided, visually imbalanced icon. So we might wanna go fix that. So I'm gonna come back into here and bring this up here by selecting this point, and I'm just gonna come in here and try to visually center this in the box. We can see here that we're getting better. It's not perfect, but this is why we had this grid here. This grid template allows us to see where this icon is falling and how it's visually taking up the space around it. Now what these key lines here do, this one here allows us to see like maybe the tallest that an icon should get. And this key line down here says this is maybe the bottom of that tallest icon here, which we've honored. As well as we can see here, there's key lines for left and right, and then maybe sort of some visual centering indicators. In this way, we can actually build out icons just like this and honor those boxes. And that's exactly what I've done with each one of these icons, is that I've tried to keep them all visually the same balance. Now, not all of these are great. This one here is maybe a little bit bigger than it needs to be, whereas this one is maybe a little smaller. They're both circles. Why aren't they the same size? So I may need to do some edits here to keep these things harmonious. But let's just use these icons as an example. We've now gone ahead and named these icons as well. And if we look here in the design document, we can see icons. Let's see right here. We've got this. If we look in the document under assets, so there's 2 different things. One is when we're actually clicking on the canvas, we can see our styles here. That's our grid styles, our color styles that we've created, and our text styles. Whereas here, we can now see our icons. If we look at assets and we look at local components, look at icons. We can see those icons there that we've created. I'll go ahead and get rid of this search since we just did that as an example. We've got these icons here, and we're gonna move on. We can see all of our different icons here. And the way that we've organized them is with that naming convention, icons slash. Now, what if you don't want to name all of these icons icon slash just to organize them? What we can do is actually do something like this, create a frame around them. And this frame, to help organize, we can call this icons. I'm actually going to give it a capitalization here, if I can figure that out. Now, what we're going to do with each one of these is come back to the layers panel. We're going to see these different icons are all named icons slash. Now, if they're in a frame, they don't need to be named icons slash. So I can select all of them. I can actually rename. And I'm just going to say, hey, just get rid of that icon slash. We don't need it anymore. Now, check this out. If I then take an instance of this component, which means I'm going to take the component, I'm going to copy paste it. When we select this component here, we can see those these four little diamonds. That means it's a main component. And here we've got description and all kinds of things here that we can document our component, say how we use it, etc. But if I click on this instance of it, notice it's a little diamond. It's a little purple diamond. And that purple diamond now is an instance of this component. If I ever change this main component, this one will change along with it. This helps us to create consistency. It's a single source of truth where this is, and then if somebody messes up with the icon or whatever, it's not going to change across the board. Actually, I misspoke. Sorry about that. In this case, if somebody were to create this icon and just simply copy this icon or bring it into our design system, if they used it here and then you use it on another page here, and what if they change that somehow? They change the height or whatever. We're gonna have two different and very inconsistent icons. But using our design system, if we have instances and don't break those components, we can see here that these icons, I can't actually change that height. These components enable us to have a very consistent iconography system. Okay, so moving on. We've created these icons now, and we just put them in this icon frame. And if we look in the assets now, I can see icons, and notice that they're all still categorized under icons. I don't need to now name them icon slash whatever. I can just keep them in this frame, and the frame organizes them for me. Moving on. We'll skip dividers, but dividers could be something where we could just put a little line in between something, and then those lines, say on twitter.com or places like that, those lines actually help us divide out bits of content. Maybe they're a little bar, maybe they're a dashed line. We could do that, but for now, we're going to skip that because it's not very interesting. Let's move on to controls. So what we've done now, just as a quick overview, we've talked about colors. We've set up color styles. We've talked about type and type scales and different ways of thinking about those. We've set up some little type scales and a little typography system. Talked about icons, the icon grid, and creating icons that all look and feel the same, visual weight and balance. And we made a few of those. Moving on to controls. Controls are what we talked about, like buttons and inputs and things like that. So let's go ahead and start on that. Now I'm just going to come here. I'm going to say maybe my text field is going to be 50 or 60 pixels high. Let's first figure this out. Well, what's in a text field? Well, there's text. So I'm going to go ahead and create my text here. And we'll just put in my text field. And I'm going to assign that a body text style here. I want the input text to be the same exact size as the body. Now, in this frame, we don't need to be 178. In fact, let's just add auto layout to this. Auto layout is going to detect all the spacing around that, but we don't need that much spacing. Maybe we need like 16 pixels of padding around it. Let's give that a try. So this text field here ends up being 54 pixels tall with our 16 pixel body text here. All right, this might be a good size. 54 pixels seems like a pretty good size. Now you could look at all kinds of those references that I'm going to share with you, and they'll give you all sorts of like, here's the average size of a desktop text field. Here's the average size of an iOS text field. But we're not going to belabor that or go into it. We're just going to make some cool text fields. All right. So in a text field, what I'd like here is maybe I want it to be by default a certain width. So I'll create a certain width here and just drag it on out. I'm going to type in text field, and we've got a text field. Maybe I want a little border radius to it. So I've decided that 4 pixels will be my border radius here. And maybe I'm going to add in a stroke or something like that. Maybe like a really subtle stroke on the inside or the outside of this text field. So I'm going to just take this black color here. I'm just going to keep it real subtle here like this. If we wanted to, we could actually just use one of our accent colors. So maybe we come in here and we use this accent color here on our text field. And then lastly, maybe we want a little bit of an inner shadow on side of it to show that it's inside a little bit. So we're going to do this. I'm going to dismiss publishing those updates. We don't need to just yet. And I just need a real subtle shadow here. So I'm going to make it very subtle, maybe only 2 pixels here, 2 pixels there, maybe 10% of opacity. We're keeping this thing really light. Now, let's take this text field and turn it into a component. Look at us. We've created our very first text field, our very first component. If we wanted to, we could take a desktop size frame and we could see what that instance looks like. Ooh, that looks pretty good. I like that. So we've made a text field. Now what does it look like to create different types of text fields? Maybe we need like a focused one, or maybe we need like a one that gets errored out. We could definitely research all of those. But for now, what we're going to do is just create like a focused one. What does a focused one look like? So here I'm going to use our variants to be able to do that. So I'm going to hit variant here, and it's going to create a secondary text field that looks just like the first one. So this one here is the default, and then this will be our focused one. This is why we use brand colors and we set up a color system, is because maybe now this stroke here, when you click into this, we want it to get like focused and be a different color. So we're going to go, okay, maybe we want this blue color here. And we can even say maybe that stroke moves to the outside and it's bigger. That way we see some visual difference in case we have people that are hard of sight. Maybe they can't see the difference between the blue and the gray, but they could see this. So this will be our focus state here. Now, if we just click on this variant set, we can say, let's just put in our state. We're going to call this our properties or states. This first one here, we can actually just say, this is default. This is our default text input. And on this one here, we can say, this is our focused state. Now we're beginning to make a little design system. How cool. So now if we actually alt drag or option drag this out, you can see that on my screen here, this would be our actual focused state of this button. And notice here with our variants, now it's so cool. We actually see focused, and we can just swap that right back out to default. If we want to express, oh, this is what it looks like when somebody's clicking in, cool. We could show that just by a flip of the switch here. Great. We've done that. We've created our first control. It's a text field. Why don't we make a button? Now, remember on these components too, you can always add grids to those as well. So maybe we actually want a pixel grid on this to be able to align this text. Because remember, we just put in 16 pixels here, but maybe we want to see that that's lining up perfectly. You can always come to these and add layout grids to them. In this case, it's an auto layout one, so we won't be able to have a layout grid. But if we did have something that wasn't auto layout, then we could add layout grids to those. So just letting you know, right now we're relying on the auto layout parameter of 16 pixels to put out our padding. All right, moving along, we can create a button. We'll do that very quickly now. So I'm going to use my text field as a base for this button. So I'm going to drag this out, and I'm just going to detach it because I want it to be exactly the same height. So we're going to create the exact same height here. We want it to be 54, but in this case, maybe we want our button text to be bold. So I'm going to break this style, and I'm going to put in bold. Now, we've realized like we're iterating this design system. We already created a new text style. So what I would recommend now, as you're building this out, you realize we really need this bold text. Come on out over here and just start defining out these different areas. So this text here, we're going to copy it and paste it, and we're going to break it here. And then we're going to assign it to body. And we're going to do exactly what we did before. We're going to break it, and we're going to use bold. And we've realized that this is what we want our button text to be. So I'm actually just going to create a new style, desktop, button, text, or just button. Oop, what did I do? Boom, create a new style, desktop, button, create style. Ah, we're good now. Now coming back to our controls once again, we're going to create this here, and we're going to add this style. So we're just going to put button. Now we've got a button text here. It's linked. Everything's all synced together. We've got a question here about how do we advise handling letter spacing. Now, there's all kinds of thoughts around this. Since this is introductory, I would say I'm not going to put a lot of advice out there, but I would just say that often headings and maybe capitalized text, so all caps, those are going to be the ones that you're going to want to letter space. Other than that, I would rely for beginners just to go with the default letter spacing, but there's plenty of scholarship around there. Hakeem, did you have something you wanted to say?
Actually, well done.
Okay. All right. So we're going to hurry along here. We're going to create our button here, and we're going to even name this here, button. And what we want to do here, since it's auto layout, we want it to automatically adjust with that button size with the contents in it. So we're going to say hug contents here. We have this, we're going to put in here button. And then we're going to do some different modifications to the styles. So I want it that hot color, but I don't want it on the stroke. I want it to actually be like that. We're going to take away the shadow underneath it and maybe just give it a drop shadow to kind of stand up. And then we're going to change the actual, we're going to change the text color for this as well. Change it to white. So now we've got this button here. Great, we're going to create a component from this. And remember, this is the same exact process that we would use for anything else. We created these text fields. We can create this button, and maybe this button has some different states to it as well. Now, we're not going to add those here on the demonstration, but we would do it in the exact same way, add in our different states for a button, and maybe we even need an icon. So what we'll do here is start talking about nesting components inside of components. So let's put an icon in here. I'm going to take this email icon, and I'm going to come back to my controls here, and I'm just going to paste in that instance here. Now with an auto layout, I can use my arrow keys to move this around, and I'm going to go ahead and change this to white because I want it to have a white icon. So now we have an icon in here, and we also have some text in here. Now, if we wanted to create a variant to this and say, what if we want a button with an icon but without? We could easily do that. I can take this button here, same thing, variant. So we've got button here, and we're just going to take the icon out of this one. And what we're going to do is name these. So if we come to the top button structure here, we can call this with icon, or just icon maybe, icon simpler. And on this one here, we can say true. And on this one here, we can say false. Now, let's test out our variant. Let's move this on over here. And we can see here, we can see icon, and it's a toggle. And the reason it's a toggle is because we said true or false. So I can actually turn this off and on here, and you can see my button changing here. Now we can see there's a little bit of problems with this button because the size is going to 56, not necessarily good, and then it's changing to 54. So we can always address this, but given limited time, we'll move along to the next thing. Now, we've already started. This can be thought of already as a very miniature design system. We've got some basic things. We've got some text fields, we've got some buttons. We can use these and flex these, and let's just give it a try and see how it works. Let's come on down here and create a card component. I'm just going to delete this forms page as we don't need it. But we can see here, this is kind of what we're expecting with a card component. Now let's try this out with our new stuff. So I'm going to say, hey, I want a button. I'm not going to worry about the icon. And I want a text field. I'm going to copy both of these. When I copy paste these, it'll actually give me an instance here. And now I've got my text here. Look at this. I've got my text field. I've got my button field, and I can line them up. So I'm going to create a little card component just like this. And maybe it'll have like a enter your address or something like that. We're just going to test out these things. So I'm going to come on in here, and I'm going to create my card component. I'm just going to add a border radius here. Now there's lots of thinking around this about why we would have a different size border radius for this card versus for those text items and for that button. But we'll just go ahead and say we're going to make this one bigger at 8, and these are smaller at 4. Maybe we want to be able to add a stroke to this. We'll do the same thing. We'll add some accent, and we'll add a little shadow to this thing as well. So it's a little off the page. Great. Now we've got a card component. We'll even call it card component here, and we'll turn it into a component. Now, let's make this thing auto layout, and let's just start adding these things in. More nested components here. This is the basis of building out our little library. So I'm going to take this here, and I'm going to take this image. Actually, I'm just going to draw an image right inside the card. This image here, I'm going to place an image. And we'll just place it here. That's a big one, but that's fine. Put it in here. And I'm going to say that I want this card to be auto layout. Boom. You'll see it gets huge. And we're going to take this image here and we're going to say we want it to fill the container. Now it'll actually get to the right size there. And we'll actually bring this image here. We'll make it a little less tall. Sometimes auto layout, when we add it, it's going to add in all kinds of spacing. So let's just adjust a few of these things. This is looking perfect. We've got this image in the background here. Now let's just add a little text field below it. Cool. We're going to add this text field below it here and see that there's no spacing here at all on this card. So on this card, we can start using grids if we'd like to and add spacing there. So we could use our 8-pixel grid if we'd like to here. But since we're using auto layout, once again, we're going to actually have to use the padding here to grid ourselves out here. And we can use space in between here as well. We'll do 8 pixels in between. These are all the rules that we'll have to start documenting out in this design system. This 8 pixels in between, this 16 pixels around. These are all important things to note that we'd have to start documenting in Figma here, like with little labels. We might actually put a label here to say there's 8 pixels in between each item. But these are all rules we think about. Think about that stadium example where the seats are exactly as far apart. This is what we're building. All right, and we'll put 4 pixels on here. Maybe we'll put our button here. Boom. Maybe we want this button to actually be to fill the container. Great. Now, as we're building this design system, we're noticing that there's problems here. I want this button text to be centered. So remember, as we're building here, we can always immediately update these things. I can come here and say, I'd like for my text to actually fill the container if we'd like. Or I can say here that I would like everything to be centered, and that will work as well. So I'm going to come back to this one as well and say, I want everything to be centered. Now when we come back to our cards, we can see that that button has been centered. This is perfect. Now it's also flexible. What about this text field? This one's not flexible, but we can set it to fill the container with auto layout, and here we are. Now we have everything working here. We've got a working example of a card component with a field and a button. Now, similarly to all of our variant stuff, we can go back and create all kinds of variations of this card component. Maybe we want to have one with a card title and a button, cancel button, etc. So we can do this in this way. Looks like we're coming to an end of our time, Hakeem.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. All right, so I'm going to close up. We got through some of the components, and there's many more that we could do, but I want to close off by showing you a little bit of a design system that I created for Dribbble, kind of taking these concepts, and then I'm give you, Hakeem, is it okay if we go a few minutes late?
Yeah, that's fine. That's okay.
Okay, cool, because I feel like I want to close this out. So we've demonstrated how to be able to create text styles, color styles, grid styles, and a starter design system by creating the base building blocks here, a type scale. We started creating some icons. We created some controls like text fields and buttons, and we started bringing those into more complex components like this. And we've set up elastic controls in here so they actually stretch and respond. Now, later on, we could start talking about how we can put these things on the grid and start really using these. But this is kind of the basis of building a design system. Moving on, I want to share these things. So let me share this file really quick with you all. Here we go. At the very end in the closing slide, you'll see all of these different resources that I put in here for you. I would highly recommend reading through these. You're never going to get enough in this design system. You're never going to get enough about design systems in 1 hour. So come through here. You can see more. I actually have a Build a Design System video series, and I think there's like 6 of these videos, and we talk more in depth about each one of these things. So I would highly advise checking those out. But there's also different design systems you can take a look at, different actual Figma libraries that you can actually base things off of. So this Fluent Figma library, if we open this, you can actually see, let me just bring this in. I want to showcase a few things. So if we go here and we type in Fluent Figma library, we can see here Fluent Web. Let me just duplicate this, and never, ever, ever underestimate the power of just like tinkering around in a file. So in this file, there's so much cool stuff. Here's a great sort of organization that they've set up, sort of with a really clean layout for explaining and documentation. You can also see a more elaborate example of what we've built today. So you can see all of these different drop downs, all of these controls. Notice that theirs are so filled out, so many different things. Text fields, drop downs, check boxes, and radio boxes, and good examples on how they're set up. I would highly advise coming to look at this to see how to start building your design system. And then lastly, just keep in mind that there's lots of different examples here that you can go to. Figma also has a YouTube with tons of tutorials. I do 5-minute tutorials there called Figma in 5, but there's tons of other tutorials there that you can find great assets and just start learning things. And then lastly, just to show you, this is what we were building in at Dribbble right before I left. And this is what defined the new style that they moved to. So I just kind of wanted to show you what it is that we built.
That's quite interesting.
This is all of the initial stuff. Now this, remember, a design system is living and breathing. So it's always going to change and grow. But in this case, this is how we started. We came up with our new color systems. This is an older file, so it's a little bit, the alignment's messed up on some of these things. But we also defined color mappings. How do we come from the old system into the new system? Well, this color will be replaced by this new color, etc. We also set up navigations. These are all components that are built up of other smaller components. So you can see here, like, here's my large, medium, small. You can see what a large explorer, like a drop down, might look like in a large area. You can see that we designed out all of the different smaller navigational areas here too. So here's the mobile map, the mobile menu. But in this, I actually built in all of it with auto layout. So you could turn on various things, but this was always just a single menu like this. So when you first put this into your mockups, it just looks super simple, but you're able to actually bring out all of these mobile menus. We actually had button styles, and we defined what those button styles would be, as well as buttons with icons, buttons with photos inside of them, and social buttons. Moving through, we defined breakpoints. What will different sizes, when will the browser change? Like, when will the actual website layout change? And we can see that here, that we defined all those things. And now this is the live version in code. So we can see here, as we get this navigation smaller and smaller, notice we go to a 3x grid, but we have a 4x grid here, goes to 3. And then of course, as this navigation gets smaller, notice it gets centered, Dribbble logo goes into the center here, and we have this menu here. These were all defined in our design system before. And of course, you can move on. You can see we have forms and sliders, active states, all of these things, drop downs. What does it look like when it's on a dark element? What do our cards look like? What do our cards with multiple images look like? Do they flex? Do they have multiple buttons? All these things. And these are all part of setting up a design system. So I'm going to go ahead and close out and say, thank you so much for listening. I know we couldn't get to a ton. I was trying to talk about so many different things with you all, but just keep in mind, it's just a set of rules that you're going to use to help communicate out to your team and use these components and just build on only the components that you need and keep adding on only the components that you need as you go. That way you don't feel like you have to build this enormous system. You can start small and then keep growing.
Yeah, thank you so much for this session, Roger. This is very, very interesting and insightful. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining this session. And please, if you have any question, please drop it in the comment section for Roger to answer now. So we're having 15 minutes to 10 to 15 minutes for question and answer session before we close this session. Thank you so much. And it's nice to have you here, Tom.
Thank you everyone for listening, and yeah, dig into those resources. I think you're going to find a lot more with those videos too that'll help as you grow. And I'm always available on Twitter, so if you have any conversations or things you want to talk about, or I'm building this component and I'm wondering, is this the best way to build it? I'd be happy to provide that. My Twitter here is twitter.com/Raji. Thank you all. It was really nice to be able to speak to you all today. Thanks so much.
Victor Naz is creating Eurogy.
Thanks, Victor. Daniel, I totally agree. Figma does rock. I don't know how to say your name, but Oladimeji, thank you so much.
Yeah, Oladimeji.
Sorry, Hakeem. Can you say that again so I say it right?
Oladimeji.
Oladimeji?
Oladimeji.
Oladimeji. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm too American.
So,
Remy's asking
okay, there's a question
here.
here from Shotola Mage.
Mm-hmm.
How do you approach design system? Do you start at the beginning of the project or during the project or after the whole project?
I can speak to experiment, Shotola, on that one. What I did last time is we already had an existing design system, and it was all in code, which is strange. Dribble was built on a design system that was purely implemented in code because the designer knew code, but he actually didn't build this out in Sketch. There was actually no visual library. It was just a knowledge of all these things in code. So in our case, what we did is we inventory by going through the code and talking to our developers, finding all the different examples of colors that were used and asking why. What's the purpose for that color? Why do we use this color anywhere? And in this way, we can actually weed out the colors and use the right colors. But also, in this way, we're also able to take screenshots of the website, every different page that we knew of. And then we replicated that and recreated that in Figma by measuring out the spacing and everything. This created the basis for our design system. But I got to be honest, it's not always that way. Sometimes your design system doesn't exist in code. Sometimes your design system doesn't exist at all. Maybe you just have a style guide from your brand team. And so you'll start in very different ways at that point. Maybe start by doing research on a lot of these other design systems. Ask yourself what the devices that you're going to support are. And then you can start looking at guidelines within iOS. So say you're working on an iOS project and you want to set up a design system for that. Maybe start looking at the default padding and form field size and everything like that Apple provides, and just don't make it hard for yourself. Base it off that first. They put a lot of research into it, and maybe just make some slight adjustments. Maybe you're changing button colors, etc., and then grow from there.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Hope your question is answered, Mr. Shotola Ahmed. And next question here: do you recommend creating the design system, or let me see if I get the question very well.
Yes, Daniel.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. I recommend absolutely talking. Since I was a developer, I knew that this was the way to do it. I absolutely recommend bringing your brand team in and bringing your developing team in, and then your design team in, and having a conversation all together. Because with Dribble, what we did is we actually worked with our developers, and they helped us inform our naming convention. So I'm not sure if I can actually share what that naming convention was. Let me see here with our colors. Yeah. Let me see here if we actually, okay. Can't really make this wider, but we ended up having a naming convention here. Notice 20, deep blue sea 20. So everything was sea themed just because we wanted to have some fun. But notice there's deep blue sea 20, 40, 60, 80. That was actually advice given to us by our development team, because what you don't want to do is just like pink darker, pink darker, pink darkerest. The problem is, as the design system gets bigger and bigger, how are you going to be able to find like a new name for that? So the developers absolutely consulted us and said, we need to be able to give these names that we can actually put a new color value in, because it is a living, breathing system. What if we needed a little bit of a color in between this 40 and 60? Perfect. We have a 50. We have a 55. So yes, absolutely recommend working with your development team, and then of course working with your brand team as well, because how will you know your primary brand color? In Dribble's case, we actually had this flamingo color, which is our Dribble pink, And so we felt like that was so important that that was the primary color. But without talking with the brand team on that, we might say, well, what about this one? This one seems darker, so we should use that. But that's not really our brand color. That's sort of a secondary color, if you will. So absolutely recommend that.
Thank you so much for answering that question, Roger.
No problem.
Do you have any other question? Please, if you have, please drop into the comment section. Yeah, you're welcome, Daniel. Oh,
And
I think,
we got
okay.
one from Remy too. Should I answer that one, Hakeem?
So what?
We've got one from Remy.
Okay.
Remy, I don't have anything on colors, but thank you for your feedback. I would love to do like a 5-minute tutorial on colors. So I'm going to add that to my list. I don't have anything. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, question, F4 icons too. Okay. Someone is telling you to add icons too.
Yeah, we need one on icons as well. And then Shotola, I'm in the black horror club. So it's all about black people in horror movies. So you can join me there if you're into horror.
Okay. Okay, another question about the icon from Marty. I noticed that the icon key lines have a big gap between the frame and the icon. They are frame area. Okay.
That's a good question. Yeah, let me see if I can answer that one. So on this template here, the reason that we have a gap, and I hope this is what you're talking about here, there's like this gap here. Let me see if I can actually remove some of the is it the diagonals I want to remove? Let's see. No. Let's see here in the template. That's what I'm trying to get to. Yeah, I want to turn off this grid. Okay. So the reason that these key lines don't go absolutely all the way over is because if you hit the far ends of the bound of the icon, you typically didn't have any room to fudge a little bit. So for instance, if we've got an icon here and this icon takes everything here, well, if we're comparing against another icon and that other icon here, maybe that icon goes to the full bounds the other way. A lot of times you have to do tweaking and adjusting so that everything feels visually the same weight. And that's why we have a little extra padding built in. So notice when we talked about these icons here, this is a problematic icon set because this icon here is 14 by 14. So it takes up about the same visual weight and balance, whereas this one is bigger. Now, a good way to actually test against this is to actually put a blur on this. So if I go here and I just say layer blur these things out, and I blur them out a little bit more, you can actually see now an indicator of visual balance. Which one feels bigger to you? Which one feels heavier to you? The one on the left. And the blurring actually helps us be able to figure out like whether or not these things are visually weighted. Now let's take these things, or sorry, visually balanced. If I take this layer blur and I add it here, these sort of seem like they're occupying about the same space. So these are more visually in balance with each other. And that's why we have these extra gaps of lines here on the side here, is to allow, let's say you've got a really interesting skinny long icon, and it's like this long and this big. You might need to be able to break that grid and go outside of those to be able to achieve the visual balance that you need. Oh my goodness, I must have stopped sharing my screen. Yep, sorry about that.
Okay. You're not sharing your screen, Roger.
Yep, no problem. Yeah, somebody was following me in the Figma file, and to you, I'll tip my hat and say you are a genius. Nice work. What I was showing you here is that this is a really good test that we can. Let's do this here. We can share the screen. Can everyone see the screen?
Not yet. Okay, cool.
Great. So what I said is a good way to test for balance between icons is I can take this icon and this icon, and then I can add a layer blur to them. And we can see that they mostly take up the same space. One doesn't feel much heavier than another. But notice when I compare these two, this one, same amount of blur, this one feels much bigger visually than this one. And we're trying to come to a visual consistency in the weight of these icons. And so this blurring test can help us. That would tell me that I probably need to make this icon a little smaller here and work on that so that these things feel exactly the same weight here. And that's why I was saying that these lines here exist, is to help us find that balance. This area in here, most icons are going to be pretty balanced within that area if we can stay within these bounds. Now, if you have a long skinny icon, and let's say it's something like this, sometimes because it's so small vertically, we might need to break the rules. And that's why we have this extra padding built on the sides, is that I can actually break the rules here and go outside to help achieve that same visual balance. Cool. Hope that helped. There's a lot of science with icon design. I've got a great resource for you if you look it up. I believe if you just type in the creator Noah Jacobus, there's a lot more to learn about icons here. So Noah Jacobus here on the community. If you come here, you'll see there's something called Icons and You. And this is a workshop that we did all about building icons. This is a fantastic resource. I'm not sure how to say your name, but Mati. It's in this case it is, and I think that's a pretty common icon grid, is to have that 2 pixels on the outside. So yeah, I think that's pretty common. Also, if you look on YouTube for Noah Jacobus's Icons and You, you'll find an actual YouTube video on this as well.
Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Another question from Joshua Foss. If you're designing a site, how many driven viewports do you design for? How does Osleya work into this process?
Quite a few. I think the answer, yeah, the answer of course is it depends. But in the case of Dribble, what we tried to do is really simplify it. And what you do is you create ranges, sort of visual viewport ranges. So if we think about mobile, let's just think about mobile for one. And let me come over into here. And let's go into breakpoints here. This is kind of how we thought about them. And this really depends. This really depends on like the devices that your research has said like people access you. For instance, if you're building Clubhouse, Clubhouse is only on iOS. So you only have to actually think about a few different layouts. But at Dribble, this is what we did, and this is how we thought about it. So we thought about like, hey, small screens are anything between 0 and 768. And we called them small screen. We didn't call them mobile. We just said small screens. Then medium screens were everything between 768 and 1200. That was kind of like an iPad or maybe even like a small MacBook or something like that, a Chromebook or something like that. And then larger screens, and then we had extra large displays. And this is what we designed for. But also keep in mind that we created things on a flexible grid. So if you create designs on a grid, what's going to happen there is that what might mean that this card component here will always be the same width. But in Dribble, it's different. Notice that those cards actually are flexible. They change sizes. That's what we did when we designed on a flexible grid. You can notice that the space in between these items actually does not change. So if I actually measure it here with my screen measurer, I can see here that there are 32 pixels of gutter in between each one of them. But they actually do change sizes. So in our design system, we actually even did that with our cards. So if we come here to our shot cards, you can see that we did the same thing here. We can see, let me see if this works here. This should be responsive, meaning notice as I flex it like this, we've set up our constraints in our auto layout in such a way that it still is able to be flexible, just like it was on our website. So not exactly the most perfect answer for you, but define ranges and then define if you're going to be on a flexible grid or not. If you're not on a flexible grid, you'll want to define the breakpoints as to which your columns will drop out. So in this case, let's see here.
Awesome.
In this case, we've got 4 columns, and then it drops out to 3, and then 2, and these are all specified widths. And then, of course, once we go small enough, it would actually go to 1.
Yeah, that's really great.
Awesome.
Well answered.
Thanks for the questions, everyone. I'm glad, Olameji, I'm glad you learned something with that blur test. That's great.
Oh. So guys, do you have any question before we end this session? It's 6:26 now.
Cool.
Yeah, cool. Case of notes, a question will be ending this session. Or we have not done this before, but I think you can do this now. To know each other, and let me see if I can give everyone access to view. Okay, Ayokone, can we know you, please? I'm giving you a presenter mode now. Hey there. Okay, let me choose a random. Yeah, let's go with Oladimeji first. Yeah, Oladimeji, can we know you? Can let's struggle know you. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I think okay, it's connecting. So Roger, this is the face of Vladimir.
Hey, sorry, it's great to see you. Great to see your face. Still learning your name.
It's good to see you too.
So that's cool. That's cool.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, can hear you. Can hear you.
Okay.
Simi is on the streets actually. So yeah, you're welcome, Marty. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. Oladimeji, thank you so much. So we're ending this session now. So Raji,
Akeem, what did you say? I lost you there for a second.
okay, we'll be available by next week. The session.
Now, did you want to talk about next week?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. Where do we want to go from here? What do you think is a good call? We can continue about more components. We can talk more about like the publishing life cycle, and I could start us off with a more fully featured design system, and then talk about actually working with that design system. We can go a lot of different places from here. What do you think helps?
Yeah, I think that would really be cool. That would be cool. That would be interesting.
Yeah, so maybe what I'll do is I'll fast forward us next week, and we'll just say, okay, we've got a working design system. We built out all these things. Let's start using this design system for building larger things. So we'll talk about desktop grids and using those grids with those components and just continue with them. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we have to know this more your face. Let me give you a presentation mode and Remy. Yep. Hi, Mate. Can we know you? I just gave you the presentation mode now.
Cool.
Hi, Tom. Okay, okay, okay. Yeah. Hi, Tom.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, good.
This was great. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. So what did you learn today? Hope you got a lot today.
I've actually never done the blur test while designing an icon, so that was a new one for me. That was a highlight, and it looked like some other people in the chat really liked that too. And I have extra friends here today. They're coming to say hi. So.
Hi.
Boys, it's so good to see you.
See you. Okay. Awesome.
Cool.
Cool, Tom. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad. I would have never thought you would have learned something, so I'm glad.
No, that was great. I really enjoyed it.
Quite a bit.
So up to you, Remy. I just give you a presentation mode now. Can we know you?
Great. I'm going to turn off my video now.
Yeah. So thank you so much everyone for joining. We're gonna be ending this session now.